So how did I come to do what I'm doing? I'd always been, we're sitting in a library, and the library was always an important space for me when I was young. I went to the Excelsior Library. It's where I grew up, was Excelsior, Minnesota. And my mom would take me there routinely, and I just read a lot as a kid. I ended up going to Carleton College in Northfield and started school thinking I was going to be a poli-sci or an economics major, and ended up one day buying a book of poetry in the Carleton bookstore by William Carlos Williams, his selected poems, and kind of immediately fell in love with that. And this was my freshman year, I think, or sophomore year, and so then I started taking English classes and decided to become an English major. And I then graduated with a degree. I did some writing, in journalism, and also wrote poetry. And I graduated from college and didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I did not want to become a teacher. My parents were public high school teachers, and I didn't think I wanted to become a professor. So I wrote to some alumni, a woman named Martha Davis Beck, who was then working at Ruminator, or it was called Hungry Mind Review, I think, back then. She was an alum of Carleton, and she kind of said, well, have you thought about publishing? We have great publishers here in Minnesota. And so I got in touch with Coffee House and applied for an internship there, as she suggested, an unpaid internship. Meanwhile, I was working at a golf course. I grew up working at a golf course. And I applied for an internship. They didn't have any regular internships, but back then they had a very active letterpress program, and so I became a letterpress intern, setting type and all that. Coffee House started as a letterpress enterprise. And I finished being a letterpress intern, working under Alan Kornblum, the founder and then publisher, and then became a regular intern, which then is about editorial and marketing and fundraising. And then just stayed on. I finished my internship and I stayed on for a second internship. My first internship started in December of '94, and so this was then spring of '95. Eventually that next summer, June or July, they needed some database work done, and they were 20 hours a week at $5 an hour, and so I said, sure, I'll take it. And did that for a while, and then meanwhile, the editorial assistant, then editorial assistant who I worked under before, Sherry Hickman, left. And so she left, leaving a vacancy for editorial assistant, and I applied and got the job. So I guess August of 1995 was when I was first officially hired at Coffee House as a full-time employee as editorial assistant. Back then there was a different structure, and there was Alan Kornblum as publisher, and then there was executive director. Dawn Barrett was her name. And after a while, that changed, and there was no longer an executive director, and Alan became executive director. So that meant he had a lot more actual management duties. So I've been editorial assistant, and so now after he left, or he was promoted or whatever, there was a lot more room for me to do editorial work. And I began working more with authors. I began acquiring, eventually getting promoted, acquiring more, gradually taking on working with development and marketing, and going to board meetings. And then eventually Alan kind of started talking about, kind of when I was in my early 30s, I guess, that he wanted me to be his successor whenever that time came. And then I guess about 6 or 7 years ago, we did a strategic plan with our board. We got a giant Bush Foundation grant to help us through the transition, and we outlined the leadership transition process from Alan to me, and he gradually gave me management of marketing, of development, of everything except the financial picture. And then 3 years ago, basically I became publisher and took over everything, and I've been publisher ever since.
So, going back to that time when you picked up the book and got deflected and Carlton. Was it satisfying, your career, your life, in the way that you'd hoped it would be? Did it keep you in connection with books and reading in the way you'd hoped it would?
I don't know what I hoped exactly. I think at the very beginning I had a much more romantic notion of it. I thought that working in publishing meant sitting around talking about books and ideas. And then suddenly it became very clear that also you talk about books as products, as widgets, and that kind of was unsettling at first, because I was an English major and talking about ideas, and suddenly we're now talking about whether something's sold or not. Granted, it's a nonprofit context, so really it's a little bit different than working at a big publisher. It's all right if some books don't sell. They're important to publish anyway. I think it became satisfying as work in the way that work can seem satisfying. I knew the entire time that I was very lucky to be able to be doing what I was doing. It doesn't mean it was easy or hard. It was just something that I did and that I liked doing. I liked going to work every day. I worked very hard because I believed in what we're doing, and I wanted to work hard on behalf of the authors and on behalf of Coffee House. And it becomes very satisfying when, for a long time, it was satisfying when the books got attention, or when the authors were happy, or I got to acquire a book that I really loved. And those things are still very satisfying. But now, as publisher, there's an additional satisfaction that I get out of it as I see my employees, the Coffee House's employees, get satisfaction for what they want to do. And so I'm kind of helping enable that. And I mean, they're doing it, but I'm there seeing it. And it's nice to be able to watch other people get excited about the books in the same way that I did.
When I hear the story of your career, which is about as organic as a career can get, and one step leading pretty naturally to the other over a lot of years, I imagine that in the early stages, you were working kind of at the periphery of the ideas and language part, programming computers and such like. And then there's a period in the center, as I'm imagining it, where you were talking to authors, you were deciding what to publish, you were very much engaged with the texts. And I guess it's that part that interests me the most, because it seems like it's closest to that romance. What was that like for you when you got to actually begin to decide what should be acquired, got to actually work with new authors?
What's it like? I don't know that I thought about it that much, if that makes sense. It was more that this is my job, I guess. I mean, and I don't mean job in a bad way. Like, it's like, this is what I do. Like, this is, I think I must have unconsciously recognized early on that this is my life's work and this is what I do. And I don't know when or if I ever let myself tell myself that I was good at it. I think it was nervous. I was nervous, I guess. Probably very early on that the books that I chose would all do badly, and then I would get fired or something, because that's what happens if you pick bad books and they don't get reviewed and they don't sell. But that didn't happen. So I guess I always had to remind myself that I was lucky. I don't know. But that I also, it was a combination of luck and working hard.
So, do you remember remember your first real success in the first book you acquired that did what you wanted it to do?
Nora Wagner's Our Sometime Sister was, I think, the first novel I acquired. And it was the first time that I started reading a book and I remember the feeling of being completely enthralled and blown away and in love with the prose, kind of from the moment I opened the box and started reading it. And then it was also that we get manuscripts from everywhere, around the country, around the world, but she actually lived in Minnesota. And so then I had an opportunity to meet her. But her first book, Our Sometime Sister, did pretty well. It's probably the book of hers that did the best. And Star Tribune did a big article on it. City Pages did, I think, a cover story on Nora and her book. And so that was very kind of satisfying. I felt like I was doing something right.
Can you describe a little bit the process of reading manuscripts? I mean, you get, thousands coming into the mailbox. And so how do you go at that stack as you're trying to decide what to commit to?
You're normally weeding everything out. You're going through everything and finding all the no's, and then you're finding the things that may be okay, and you're putting to the side to read later, mostly. And so it's like getting rid of as much as you can and seeing kind of what's left is the general process. But then during that time, things leap out at you, like Nora's manuscript. And you're also having interns are taking a look, and you're telling the interns what you're looking for. You're coaching them in what a coffeehouse book is. You have volunteer readers who are also then reading and writing full reports. But a lot of it is, back when I started, and even up to 5 years ago or so, it was all paper envelopes, opening up, tearing through pages and writing on them, and now it's all electronic. And I miss the old way because you could see the piles. I'm a visual, spatial person in a lot of ways, and now it's scrolling through screens it's harder to get a sense. It's not you can't look at things as fast.
So what sort of screen do you use to decide this won't work for us, to get it kind of out of your way so you can look at the pieces that are possible?
Right away, some things are just it's a historical fiction or something, so it's not kind of what we do. The lens. So what do we get out of the way, you're saying?
Yeah, I just mean, how do you still do that first screen to decide what to look at?
Cover letter. You look at the cover letter, see if it's first of all competently written. So if something's clumsy, something's messy, something's not, they don't follow the directions of how to submit work, that's an immediate no. So I tell people when I do seminars on this, you have to do everything exactly how they want to, because editors are looking for reasons from the very beginning to reject your manuscript, because they have so much. It's unfortunate, and every editor I know has a giant backlog and wishes they could get to things sooner, and so that's kind of the result.
I see. And so that makes what percent would you imagine go away? 98% just on the grammar of the cover letter, the thing being the sort of thing
that's more like 25%. Then it becomes more about general content and kind of quality things that they don't leap off. They seem boring. Nothing special about it right away. Then you're getting to 98%.
And that's something you can tell in the first chapter or so?
Much sooner.
Much sooner. Okay, first page?
Yeah, cover letter plus first page or 2 pages.
I see. So you can get rid of about 98% of what comes in before you've read into the 4th page.
Mm-hmm. And this is, not every publisher has open submissions. We do. That's important to us for access. And so that's anyone in the world can submit to us. So it's that's part of the reason for that.
I see. And then okay, so now you have the terrible 2% that's actually possible. How do you approach that bin?
You just, whenever you have time, you look through it to see if something jumps off the page or sounds interesting. And then it's kind of just random. After that, you happen to find the ones that you love, sometimes you take too long, sometimes they get published elsewhere, or eventually you reject them and get to them, but then it's just really kind of sifting through and having a general method. At Coffee House, because of our mission of being about diversity and access, part of the weeding, how we try to make that happen is if a book comes in and kind of hits one of those points, like we have a lot of Asian American writers on our list, and so it's like, oh, this is an Asian American writer and it sounds interesting, like top of the pile to get to, right? So it's kind of, you look to the mission to guide you as well.
I see. And what role do interns and readers and people other than yourself or someone like yourself play in the sifting process?
They will take a bunch of samples, read through them, and they'll come and tell me what it's about, quickly, and kind of give me a general sense. And I tell them I want to know third person, past tense, set 1920, Scotland. I want to know those things really quickly, and then general plot, and then I'll either say like, no, not for us. And they'll give their recommendation too. And by doing that, they get a sense of what we are looking for, what I'm looking for, and then gradually they begin to learn more and more about what they want to bring forward, or what they can probably safely say is not a coffee house book.
I see. So they're in a kind of apprenticeship program to eventually do what you're doing, if they want to continue in that direction.
Right, and then I was that too. I mean, the same thing happened to me when I was an intern.
When you're reading something that you eventually acquire, that you eventually love, how long does it take to know that you want this thing?
Oh, usually about 2/3 of the way through. Because by then you have a sense of the overall structure. You might not know necessarily when it's good to go. You can't say for sure till you're done because you might have a terrible ending, but it's halfway to 2/3, you start to get really excited. You're like, okay, they're actually keeping this up.
Funny question, but I wanted to ask, how fast do you read when something
There's
like
many
that?
different speeds.
But I mean, with something that you start to get excited about, do you slow down?
I probably speed up. I don't know that it's conscious though. It's more because I'm drawn in, and so you're concentrating more and you have less distractions. If you're distracted reading a manuscript or reading a book, then it's not quite for you. But if it's good and it's just connecting with you, you're drawn in, and so you're not going to turn away.
So, okay, I think this process isn't familiar to people. It's worth kind of pushing it through. So you decide to acquire something. What happens next? You decide that we want this thing.
We call or write. It used to be call, now it's email usually. The person or the agent, like, I want to publish this book. And then, depending on if it's an agent or an author, you usually, if it's just an author, they don't have an agent. If they're submitting to us, they're like, great, let's do this. What does that mean? And then with the agent, then you actually have to start negotiating the money right away. But with an author, that actually usually comes a little bit after the excitement on their end. And then you draw up a contract and sign it, and then you're official.
I see. And what's the process from there on? I mean, assuming you've got a pretty complete manuscript.
Well, usually the book isn't going to then be published for a year or two. And so a lot of times not much happens, or it goes into, we might write up an editorial report and give it to the rest of the staff. Then the marketing department and the design department, they might get in touch with the author to talk to them about starting the marketing plans. Sometimes there's editorial work that I want to suggest. After I accept it, I'll say, these are the things that struck me. Do you want to work on it and send me a new draft in 6 months? Then they'll do that, and it kind of then slowly starts to enter production. And we start planning the marketing, the author tours, the publicity, start thinking about the cover, thinking about fundraising if it fits in any way, and planning author tours, and then eventually you're working more and more closely with the text on the line edit. and kind of at the level of the sentence, and then you're refining it to be more copy edit, and then you're further refining it to be proofread and final proofread, and then it goes to print.
I see. Now, how much of that process do you carry through to the end yourself personally?
Back a while ago, I would do, acquire it, the substantive edit, which is the big picture, and then the line edit, the copy edit, and then usually at one stage, like the proofread, if I acquired the book, that goes out to a freelancer, then it comes back, and then I do the final proof. So I'm very close to the text.
Wow. Any estimate just how many hours you put into a book before it gets published?
You mean editing?
Yeah, I mean through the process that you engage in, from that overview through all of the stages of editing.
Well, pen to paper, 50, but really, whenever you're thinking about the book, whether you're on a walk or whatever, that's working. That's editing, is also when you're thinking through and thinking about a book. So then I don't know how to measure that. That's hard.
Does it feel like a partnership with the author sometimes anyhow?
Yeah, no, not a partnership like I don't think editors should feel responsible for the artistry of the book. Like that's the author. I think it's a partnership as a publisher. But I think editors, at least I think if you're thinking that you are co-creating, you're probably in the wrong business, in my opinion. I think authors plenty of times will thank you and say you made the book better, and it may be that you helped make the book better, but the author in publishing, in fiction and prose and poetry, it's the author. They always have the last word, whereas journalism is different. Journalism, editor can be much more, involved and make changes that they want to.
Right. A few weeks ago, I interviewed Nancy Carlson, children's book author and illustrator. She was talking about her relationship with her editor and said two things that really struck me. Her first children's book was 80 pages, and children's picture books can't go above 32 pages. So the first editor was the person who told her that. And then, she had despaired of becoming an author because her spelling and such weren't all that great. And her teachers wisely said, "Don't worry about that. You have an editor for that." And that suggested a level of assistance I hadn't known before, a level of intimacy in working with an author I hadn't known before. Also, just saying, it's taken years to get these things together.
Right.
It sounds like it's a little different relation at Coffee House, that what comes in is more finished, and your relationship is more hands-off. Is that right?
Yes, unless the other circumstance would be if we worked with someone for a long time and then they show us an early draft, then we can offer them we can tell them what we think, and they have questions for us. That's different, but not if we've never worked with someone before. It's usually then very clean and pretty good to go.
So you have a different relation with like someone for whom you've published a book and it's been successful, they bring a second one. They might then make use of a kind of service on your part that a first-time author just wouldn't have access to.
Right.
I see. We've sort of circled around this mystery of the nature of the press, which of course determines a lot. Can you say a little bit about how you understand what's distinctive about your press?
Well, distinctive...
or important, maybe, not.
Well,
either.
Being a nonprofit publisher is important because we publish books because we believe they should be published. and we don't have to make decisions based on whether a book will sell X amount of copies in the first year. We don't have to spend a lot of time, if there is a book that isn't going to sell well, we don't have to then find 3 other books that are going to sell well to help pay for that one book. So being a nonprofit is very important because we're behind every book that we publish and we believe in it. Then at Coffee House we have a big emphasis on diversity and on experimental writing. And kind of how I think about that is there's different forms, experimental writing, whatever that is. I mean, it's when forms are being stretched or forms are encountering each other, they change. That's how, just like how in the U.S., being a country largely of immigrants, people come to, how each culture has its own kind of way of telling stories and having forms. And so then they come here and they run into a bunch of other forms of other people, and then they create new ways of telling stories. So that's kind of where the experimental side or innovative side of our mission comes and kind of meets the diversity mission. For a while when we started, we used the term underrepresented. There was a real issue with commercial publishing in that there weren't enough writers of color being published. And so that became, and it's still true, but that became a really important part of how we articulated our message and what we said that we were doing. And that has evolved. While that's still true, there are more voices in mainstream publishing now than there were. So now it becomes a little bit more nuanced. Like maybe there are people writing in those traditions that are doing something different and outside of those canons. So that's where kind of Coffee House comes in. We're publishing work that is challenging assumptions, that's challenging formal understandings, that really, I think, respect the reader and ask the reader to kind of meet them halfway. It's not books that could easily be television shows. They're books that you might have to work at, and it might be much more rewarding. I heard our managing director said something the other day that I thought was interesting. Some books are easy, like walking down the street, and that's fine. And some books are like climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, like very difficult. But when you get there, it's extremely satisfying, and you're a better person for it.
So, how do you get yourself into the right frame of mind to tell the difference between something exciting and experimental and something crazy? Is there a reading program you undertake to say what's out there, what's been published? How do you make? I mean, that would be the hard thing for me.
There was a poet named Jack Spicer who actually taught at the U for a while, who was a linguist, and he talked about. He said his poems came from Martians, and that are always sending him signals. And what he meant by that, I think, is that you have to come to trust the strainer or the sieve that is your head, and that all that you've experienced and all that you've learned and taught yourself and learned from other people and read and understand about literature is creating taste, is creating instinct, is creating it's a skill, I guess, discernment, and you read and you rely on that muscle, that strainer. That's how you have to, if you're choosing books and believe in them, you just have to trust that. And you can't, if you start questioning it too much, then you're in trouble.